Hello farmers, Remy here. It's been a while since Story of Seasons A Wonderful Life was released, and we still don't know much of anything about the new Story of Seasons game, nor is there a release date in sight. I've been wanting to scratch that farming sim itch, so I decided to pick some oldies back up and revisit my childhood memories. Surprisingly enough, for as much as I remember liking Tree of Tranquility and Animal Parade, I actually had not played either game since around 2009. I couldn't for the life of me remember what changes were made from one game to the other, so I said, what the heck? I'll just play both of them at the same time. Now, initially I was gonna just do a comparison video, and I will be uploading that soonish, hopefully, but after playing both games for a while, I decided to take a moment to really appreciate Tree of Tranquility, because as many of you will probably agree, Animal Parade is better, in almost every way. But I just feel like Tree of Tranquility deserves a moment to stand in the sunlight. It was a good game, and it's still really good now. If it wasn't for certain things that Animal Parade expands upon, I might even prefer it, honestly. The first thing to note about this game is that it was the first Harvest Moon game released on the Wii, about 2 years after Magical Melody was released on the GameCube. The visuals are a marked improvement over the GameCube era games. I was surprised at how good the game still looks actually. I dare say that even compared to later entries, Tree of Tranquility still holds up visually. And can we get into these character designs? To this day, this is the best art style that the series has ever used, in my opinion. And I'm sad that we never get to see this art style again outside of the Wii titles. Mika Nunokawa really ate with these designs. It was refreshing to see such a varied range of looks for all the marriageable characters. The art direction is one of the things that really makes this entry stand out, especially back when it was released. Magical Melody's character designs were very cute in comparison, and while A Wonderful Life's designs did look more realistic, I think Tree of Tranquility has a good balance of more realistic proportions while still being cute. Moving on from the art, which I could honestly gush about all day, let's look at the actual story. The plot is pretty simple. You see an ad for a ranch and make your way to the island via boat, when suddenly there's a storm and your character passes out, waking up at the inn where you're introduced to the mayor and the townspeople. After a short tutorial, you get to pick where you'd like to set up your farm, much like its predecessor, Magical Melody, and then you're left to your own devices until you've shipped enough products to unlock the main story. The start of the game can feel pretty grueling. You have limited stamina and limited funds. My character was on the verge of passing out after a couple swings of my tools on the regular. Don't even get me started on how much I avoided the mines. And even after upgrading my hammer a few times, I was still struggling. It made collecting ores for upgrades a frustrating experience. You do have the option of upgrading your tools by buying them from the general store, but they're very expensive and making money in the first year is not easy. At least not for me. This game is intense to play and you have to have a lot of patience. It takes a long time to make any kind of progress. I don't think I even had my first animal until the end of summer. As you increase your skills and upgrade your tools, it does get a lot easier though. So don't be intimidated just because it starts off hard. This game gives you a lot of options to make progress with, which I really appreciated. And if you're going into it with a plan, chances are that you can make a lot more progress than I did. Now I kinda wanna go back and restart the game just to see if I can finish it quicker. Despite the difficulty curve being turned up to 11, it didn't make the game any less fun for me. I do understand why they decided to change that aspect in Animal Parade, but that's a story for another video. I really like the slower pace of the start of the game. It really eases you into the atmosphere of the island with only hints here and there of there being something deeper going on in the background. One of the things that I found interesting about this game is that there's a part-time job system. It's a mechanic that I don't recall being in previous titles, correct me if I'm wrong, and sadly it does not get brought back in later games, including Animal Parade. There isn't too much to do in the early game after finishing up your chores on the farm, what with your stamina being so bad and all, so it was a great way to make some money in the meantime. Not only did it help to pass the time and give you some pocket change, you'd also be able to raise affection with the characters you worked with. It was particularly useful in the early game where you're struggling to get by, much less have the resources to give out gifts. It was a great way to start getting close to the characters. Most of the time I was jumping from one part-time job to the next. It didn't really feel like I was waiting around though. an issue that does come up in later games that I'll get around to talking about eventually. It took quite a while for me to finally hit the plot, but to be fair, I was playing without a guide, so I made a lot of mistakes along the way. If I had unlocked the fishing rod earlier, for instance, I could have started up the plot a bit sooner, but I did not realize I didn't have it since I was playing Animal Parade as well. In my mind, I'm thinking I already had the fishing rod. Meanwhile, I never unlocked the cutscene for it. But I'm getting off track, so let's get back to the point. Anyway, once you do finally get the plot going, you'll be tasked with gathering materials for the harvest sprites, with varying degrees of difficulty for acquiring them, so that they are able to summon the rainbows that will help the harvest goddess reawaken and save the island from decaying further. There are a lot of characters that will not show up in town until you unlock the first rainbow, so the sooner you accomplish that goal, the better. Again, I messed up by not getting the fishing rod until halfway through summer, so it took forever to get that first rainbow to unlock, and even longer for my favorite townspeople to move onto the island. Not to mention I wasn't able to expand my rucksack until mid-fall because Shelly, who happens to be the one who gives you the upgrade, doesn't show up on the island until you unlock the first rainbow. All that being said, the main story is challenging, but it's not a chore. I saw some people complain that the seasonal nature of some ingredients made things unnecessarily difficult, but it didn't really bother me. I had many setbacks, but the game moves at a pretty decent clip, and there's usually more than one way to get certain items. I played through the first year and some of spring year 2, and I was well on my way to finishing up the last rainbow, even with all the setbacks I encountered. Honestly, aside from the first rainbow, there's no real reason to try and rush through the story. Unlike some of the previous entries, you don't need to complete the main story by a certain deadline, nor do you need to finish it to get married. There's plenty to do and unlock post-marriage too, so it's actually better in my opinion to just take your time with the main story. Later games cut the mines out entirely, unfortunately. A lot of farming sims, the ones I've played recently anyway, in order to make the mine more interesting, they include a combat mechanic, which honestly I'm not a huge fan of. What really struck me about the mines in this game was the fact that the difficulty came from 1, your stamina, which at the start of the game makes going into the mines a frustrating endeavor, 2, your rucksack inventory. I was stuck with 10 spaces for 3 seasons, so I couldn't make long trips and had to be more strategic about what I was planning to get. And 3, instead of creatures to combat, these mines have gases that are sometimes released when you smash rocks and crystals. The gases have a wide range of effects on your character, from illness to healing to confusing your character and disrupting your control of them. It's very similar to the mine in Magical Melody. I think in the entire series I like this rendition of the mines the most. It's challenging, but it's not overly tedious. The fishing is pretty standard, exactly what you would expect from a Harvest Moon game. Nothing special, but you will need to do it to complete the rainbows. This game has a wide variety of animals, some of which I don't think we see in later entries like the ostrich or the silkworm. The basic barn and coop hold a decent amount of animals in them, so I never really felt the need to upgrade them in my playthrough. There are also various animals around the island that you can befriend and eventually get them to be your pet, including a penguin. Depending on the size of your house, you can keep up to 5 pets, which is incredible. The farming in this game is pretty fun. I really thought that it was unique that the seed bags in this entry are 1x6. It could be inconvenient at times, but it made keeping everything neat and tidy easier for me. You can also quickly level up your skills, and you don't need an upgraded watering can to be able to water multiple crops at the same time. You only really needed to upgrade the watering can to increase the amount of water it could hold. Even though it was difficult to upgrade your tools, it didn't impede you too much in getting things done on the farm. There's a nice variety of crops to grow too, so it never gets boring. Another interesting tidbit about the farming in this game is that while there are seasonal crops, there's a surprising number of them that you can actually keep growing on your field past its season. So for example, there aren't many crops that grow in the winter, but I actually managed to keep my eggplants and yams around until the spring. I'm not really sure if this works with crops that only have 1 yield, but I loved being able to grow things out of season without needing a greenhouse like in some of the other games. I also liked the fact that the field wasn't too big. It kept me from going overboard with growing too many crops. The additional fields were also at a reasonable distance from your main field, so you could really customize your farming experience to your liking. On the further away plots, I just grew fruit trees so I wouldn't have to waste so much time watering crops. That way I could focus more on befriending the townspeople instead of spending all day on my farm. The festivals in this game were nice, but they didn't have much flair to them. There were 2 or 3 festivals per season, and one of them was always the flea market. A few of the festivals did have mini games that were enjoyable, but I never really went out of my way to play them again. Unlike other games in the series, not everybody would actually show up for each festival either. They would show up sporadically throughout the day, but even then, not everybody participated, so that was kind of a bummer. Even the romantic festivals were kind of lackluster, but the romance in this game was kind of lacking for me in general, which I'll get more into in the next section. There were a few festivals that stood out to me though, one being the flea market and the other is the art festival. Not only was the flea market useful for gathering different materials for the rainbows, I just really liked the variety of things that were sold every season. And well, I'm an artist, so of course I'd enjoy the art festival. That and I just like being able to buy things, what can I say? Animal Parade definitely improved on some festivals, but we'll talk about that next time. I like the cast for this game quite a bit. I do think that the part-time system goes a long way towards making you feel connected towards the characters. It helps you raise their affection, so it's easier to befriend them and get new dialogue and make you feel like you're actually getting to know people over time. You also get to see them walking around town going about their day quite a bit, making the town feel more lively. And this is a small thing, but I really like that the characters comment on the weather. It adds a bit more charm to the game. All that being said, if there is one thing that is a bit weak in this game, it's the relationships. There's a distinct lack of heart events that's very palpable. This is an older game, so I'm cutting it a lot of slack. For me, I like a more engaging experience with the characters, and the older games have a lot of repetitive dialogue, so I tend to be less critical because of how old they are. However, even the much older titles had proper heart events where you get to know the marriage candidates better. They weren't always super fleshed out, but you got a good sense of who the characters were and what their dreams, goals, etc. are. Tree of Tranquility falls really short by not including any of that. You have 2 dates, the first of which isn't all that romantic, and then the proposal, which, I like the addition of dates, but it falls short when that's all we get. Yes, their dialogue changes as you get closer, but it doesn't really suffice. I pursued Jin and Gil in my playthrough, ultimately marrying Jin. I wanted to pursue Chase too, but he sadly didn't show up until spring of year 2 for obvious reason. And I could not tell you anything about Jin except that he had some kind of tragic backstory that was only hinted at but never revealed. I don't really know why they decided to go in this direction, because like I said, the older games did have the heart events, and I do feel like this game was trying to go for a more mature and realistic approach to the relationships, but it really just did not work for me. I'll get more into this aspect in later videos. The 3DS titles are where I think the series peaked in terms of the relationship mechanic, but for now we'll just leave it at it's not great in this game. To go on a side tangent for a moment in regards to the relationships in this game, there are rival marriages and they are insanely easy to trigger. Funnily enough, I accidentally triggered the rival marriage between Anissa and Jin literally a week before I could get the blue feather to propose. Needless to say, I had to restart the entire day and avoid the clinic altogether. For whatever reason, you only need 3 hearts with your rival to activate the rival marriage, and befriending people in this game is also easier than in some of the other games in the series. I did it completely by accident because I did so much part-time work at her parents' shop. All this to say that you need to avoid your rivals at all costs before you choose who to marry. Getting back on track, I do love that there's rival marriages, and it's a shame that they removed that mechanic from future games. I'm also a huge fan of the fact that there's rival children in this game. There are a few others in the series that have rival children, but none to the same extent as this entry. I also love that your child looks different and has a different personality depending on who you marry. A Wonderful Life obviously has a more complex child raising system, but Tree of Tranquility does a great job incorporating elements of that system while still making sure that the overall game is fun. No offense to A Wonderful Life enjoyers, I like that game a lot and I do want to talk about the remake at some point, but in regards to the overall experience of playing A Wonderful Life, it's not nearly as fun. Tree of Tranquility marries concepts from previous games and includes a few new departures to shake up the formula. It does a fantastic job at it. There are a couple more things that I wanted to bring up that I'm gonna leave for the Animal Parade video. It just makes more sense to talk about them in relation to the changes that game made, so I'll hold off on it for now. But I did want to take a moment to gush about this game for a bit because it does often get overlooked for its successor, which is understandable. Animal Parade is an incredible game that expands on nearly everything that Tree of Tranquility brought to the table, but Tree of Tranquility is still a great game to play even now. It's got great pacing, an endearing cast, great music, it's challenging and fun, and I had a great time with it. I don't think that you should skip out on it just because Animal Parade exists. There are so many differences between them that it really is its own experience. And even if Animal Parade ends up being your favorite between the two, I don't think that you'll regret checking it out anyway. I fully expected to find it severely lacking in comparison to Animal Parade, and yeah, there's certainly aspects of Animal Parade that are much better, but I don't regret taking the time to play this one again. If anything, it just makes me appreciate how much effort went into both games. If you've played Tree of Tranquility, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you haven't played it before, I strongly encourage you to give it a chance. You can catch me on Blue Sky and Twitter for updates on the next video, and whatever random thoughts pop into my head. Twitter's kinda broken, so I don't really use it too much these days, but I'll try to at least post my progress there every now and then. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all when the stars align.